First startups are always a good time if you spent months building your car and modifying it and rewiring things and all that sort of stuff. Can also be a very stressful time. So there's sort of a process that you should go through before you attempt to start the engine. Human nature get very excited about stuff and just want to start the thing up before it's ready. Don't do that, you're only going to cause yourself drama. You really should have everything ready to go for when you hit the key or when you start configuring. You should have already checked through everything. So obviously cooling system should be done. If you don't have a cooling system and you do start it up, you're going to have to turn it off prematurely anyway. So get that done. It should be full. We're going to do that in a second. Oil. This engine is recode, so we got to put running in oil in it, which we have. Oil pressure. It is always best to try and achieve oil pressure just by cranking the engine before you try and start it. Some engines will not do it. They need to be at a certain RPM before they'll achieve oil pressure, but getting some circulation through the engine is desirable. So you should be able to see oil coming through your top end and that sort of thing. So you know that there's like at least circulation through the engine, so everything's lubricated. And then monitor it once you start it up. It shouldn't take long to get oil pressure. Every engine's different. Some engines you should research first. You may need to pack the oil pump with petroleum jelly, Vaseline, whatever, just so it gets suction. A lot of old engines are pains in the butt for that sort of stuff, so research that first. Most new engines, it doesn't matter, they'll suck the sump inside out as soon as you crank it, so that's a good thing. I've already done that with this, picked up oil pressure in a reasonable time, so we're happy. I checked under the cover, you can see oil coming through with the cap there, so we've got good circulation. Next thing, fuel pressure. Set your fuel pressure. We pop this off, hot wired the pump, just let it run, and then we checked on our gauge. Our GFB regulator has a gauge option, so we fitted one to it. Doesn't have a fuel pressure sensor on this particular setup. And just set your pressure to whatever you think it should be running. I think their factory set at about 43 pound, which is a pretty reasonable point. Some engine management systems or injectors want like 58, 4 bar, whatever suits, but make sure it's at a reasonable point. Probably I'd say between 35 and 55 is reasonable enough to get things working. Check for leaks. Obviously, if it's leaking, don't go any further, fix it. No fuel leak is acceptable. No weep, no nothing, fix it. There's something wrong. So we go through that process, leave it running for a couple of minutes so anything that could be a problem is exposed, and fix it, because fuel leakage is a serious matter. Don't mess with it, especially when you're trying to configure an engine, because backfiring and flames out the intake and that sort of thing can be an issue, and any fuel leak will not go along well with that for you. So be sensible, use your brain as always. So next thing we got to do after we make sure everything mechanically is good is plug computer in, go through the process, whatever your computer you're using. If it's a factory ECU, you shouldn't have to do too much, unless it's got different injectors or whatever, and then you've got to reflash it. But all common sense, which may not be that common. So think about it. Don't risk your project by doing stupid stuff like not having injector seals that are leaking or something like that. It's just ridiculous. Don't get overexcited. This is a crucial time. If you do it right and there is a problem, you just shut it down, fix the problem, and continue on. Don't go free revving it to 11E because you're excited about getting your engine started for the first time in a couple of years. Use your head. Probably something that should be mentioned with cooling systems, unless you've got like a 1965 Nova with a 283 in it. Most modern, as in the last 40 years, cooling systems are not as easy to fill as people think. If you get airlocks in them, it just will not work. The thermostat won't open. It'll get it'll overheat, it'll dump air out or spit water out. They just aren't that easy to fill up as they were in the 1960s because of modern systems mostly they have lower thermostats. They have potential air pockets. These cars in particular have this engine retrofitted and they have a weird radiator in them that is renowned for being a pain in the butt. Nissan engines in particular have little bleed points on them, which this one's only got one left. There was one up here previously when it had a different manifold on it. That's a little bleed screw there. There's a process that you need to take. Some engines are absolute nightmares to get the air out of. Subarus in particular, it takes a lot of time and experience to get those things to behave themselves. So please don't assume that you can just open the cap and go like this with some water, start the engine up and walk away, or go to Macca's or whatever. You can't do that. Changing the coolant, just changing it, is an hour-long job to do properly. If you think you're Speedy Gonzales and you can do it faster than that because you've changed the oil a few times, you're going to end up with blown head gaskets and stuff like that because you don't know what you're doing, and you need to, don't assume that everything is simple. It is a long process. You need to run the engine, you need to cycle it, if it's got a thermofan, it needs to cycle multiple times. You need to get all the air bubbles to stop coming out of here. If you don't, then you're going to have air bubbles that will never stop coming out of here because you'll blow a head gasket if you go and drive the car. So filling is the start point. If you got it all drained out, everything ready to go, when you fill it, don't seal the system up. Take off the highest point hose, usually a heater hose, take one of them off the firewall. That's going to let air exit the system. If you don't do that, it'll take you ages to fill it up because air bubbles will have to keep coming out where you're trying to fill it. So hose off, start filling, it will go in quite easily. Eventually it'll come out of a hose, like one end of the hose, either the heater or the hose that goes to the heater from the engine. Usually it's from the engine first because the heater circuit is normally the primary bypass for any engine because it gets hot first and the heater needs to work quickly. So as soon as water starts coming out, you need either you or someone else block that hose off, keep filling until it comes out of the other side. So that's filling up the heater core. Airlocks in heater cores is super common and it is very damaging if it's depending on the vehicle. You must get all the air out of the heater core. That's a good start. So once you've got that coolant coming out both hoses, plug it up. You're going to make a bit of a mess. That's just how it is. Continue to fill until it doesn't really want to take any more. Having a big head on here is a good idea. You probably noticed that Woody and I have some homemade Coke bottle with a bit of rubber on the end of it. You can actually buy a proper thing that goes in there. They're a great thing to have, especially if you're doing coolant changes all the time on modern cars. What are they called?
Funnel bucket.
Funnel bucket. So they have multiple attachments on them, fairly big thing. That's a great thing to do. If you're doing this all the time or often, get one of those. Excellent tool. I don't know why we don't have one. We probably should get one. Then you've got to start your engine. Obviously it's going to be a bit difficult in this case because the engine's not going to run perfectly first up. Well, maybe it will, but don't expect it to. If you're just doing a change, start the engine up. What I normally do is, if you've got a cable throttle, is just quick revs. It's speeding up the water flow from the pump, dropping it off. That helps to push coolant through the heater core because the heater core is always the primary bypass. If it's got one, most cars have a heater core, obviously. Obviously, if it's got a heater tap, which not all cars have heater taps, only certain things do, you've got to open that up too. So keep revving the engine, keep adding water if it starts swallowing it. Engine starts heating up, it's not over. It should stabilise and just sit there idling, hot water in your funnel bucket or whatever, spitting out air bubbles. The air bubbles is what you've got to get out because there shouldn't be any air in the cooling system because air does not cool engines down. So keep going until that happens. As I said, hour-long exercise to change coolant. If you're doing it for less than that, you're probably not doing it right. So we'll start by filling her up, I think.
Premix or concentrate, Alan?
Concentrate. I know it's hard for you to concentrate because you're a Gen Y kid, but try.
Keep going, bro.
I'm a-going.
Righto.
This is our little bleed port that Nissan provides us. A lot of Nissan engines have these, especially at this age.
My Challenger's got one of them too, Al. My Challenger's got a few of them, actually.
Is it? Is the Challenger engine as good as an RB26?
It is a 3 litre. Got a big block.
Which one's more reliable?
I think there's a video on YouTube about that.
What? Challenger versus RB26? We should do that.
3 litre versus 3 litre. Oh, sorry, 2.6 versus 3 litre.
No, it was a 3 litre. It was one of these, but with an RB26 head. Oh no, it was just the block. Yeah. Turns out that Toyota makes better engines than Nissan. Who'd have thought?
Sorry, can you just say that again for all the people?
Blah, 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 blah. Turns out that Toyota makes better engines than Nissan. I'm surprised. The Nissan V8s are pretty good, actually. I've had a couple of them.
They are pretty good, eh?
I want a twin turbo one, just for something different, though.
Twins?
Always single, because they're like the biggest engine this side of a, I don't know, Coyote V8. Very wide.
We're talking a 41 or a 45?
Oh, 41, I reckon. So I'm just pumping the bottom hose with my thumb. Just what that's doing is there's a little bleed hole in the thermostat just to let air come through. This sort of encourages it to come through prior to starting it up. Sometimes you need to do this the whole time to try and get the thermostat to open on a, I don't know, Subaru, for instance.
I thought you liked Subarus.
Demons for not opening thermostats. I hate cars equally. I'm not racist.
Do you hate cars or you love cars equally?
Both.
Oh.
I'm just judging them on technical merit.
How does the RB30 rate?
I actually quite like this engine. It's so simple. That's what makes it better over a sort of a 25 or a 26 or whatever, is that the simplicity of it is just, they still work really well. They still get 7 seconds out of single cam heads, albeit no doubt heavily modified, but the simplicity is there. One camshaft, very simple to put together, almost impossible to break a camshaft unless you're using a hammer, whereas
Or if you don't remove the thrust retainer plate?
Yeah. RB25s and 26s are demons for amateurs breaking camshafts. Trying to put them in, they're quite reasonably difficult to get in there, so are 2Js. But yeah.
So are 1UZ BBTIs.
Yeah, I heard that. I actually heard it go, snap! Who was that? Oh, that's right, it was you.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right, they're easy to get. 1UZ VVT camshafts.
Sure they are.
Just about ready to plug the ECU and wideband controller in. There's the wideband. Has been superseded now. There's a new box that is probably a bit easier to mount. It sort of looks a little bit more like that. So it's got little mount tabs on them, which is great. Also, I believe it uses a 4.9 sensor now as well, but they still work perfectly fine. That's the new ECU, cute little thing.
It is very cute, isn't it?
Packs a punch, does the job. This is the old ECU. It would also pack a punch if you got swiped around the head by it. This is how you adjust the idle speed with a little dial. But if you wind it all the way down, round this way into this little diagnostic mode, that clicks in, then there's some lights in here that flash and tell you what's wrong. I think they might be the eyes of the hamster that runs the computer. Very old school. It looks like it's been underwater too, which was a bit of a VL thing. They were prone to having leaking windscreen seals, which used to wet these. So we might put that in the VL museum and go with the new, I think. Wiring's obviously all good to go. Well, I hope it is. Let's plug it in anyway and see what happens. Just using the internal map sensor. Works perfectly fine for this application. Wideband. That's its COM wire, CAN communication, and that's its power supplies end, also out to the sensor itself. This is all going to mount up here just where the old computer was. That's pretty much just the original loom that I've modified to suit, so plenty of room there. Obviously the old computer was massive, so gives us a bit of space to work with.
Is it just one hamster inside?
This one has like tons of solid state hamsters instead of one just running around.
Okay.
It's much better. And they all talk to each other with USB and stuff. ECU's all plugged up, so I'll get Woody to hit the key and make sure she fires up all right. We got fuel pump prime occurring, so that indicates that everything's fine.
LEDs there too, bro.
Now we just got to open up the ESP software. So when you first plug your ECU in and turn it on, it is very important that you do not crank the engine over. There's so many variables of trigger types and all that sort of thing, engine configs. If you crank the engine, it will probably either fill the engine up with fuel or do all sorts of stupid things. It's got to be all configured first. Don't touch anything. So we open it up. It's going to have errors everywhere because it's not configured, because it's just got a base configuration in it, so you can switch it on. So we have to go in to the setup. We've got engine main. It's actually got a 6-cylinder config in it. 3000cc piston 4-stroke 6-cylinder. 15364, that's all correct. Trigger. There's tons of these. Pages of them, so you have to get the right one. This particular engine's trigger pattern will be listed in here because it's a very common engine. So we just have to go down and find him. We've got all the RBs here, 20, 25, 26, 30, that's us. When I click it, it tells you what the trigger is, just to make sure that you've got the correct selection. So it's on the cam, 6 evenly spaced windows, 1 unique window size, the rest match. So it's already set everything correctly.
That's pretty handy, eh?
Yep. So all the common engines are covered. Sometimes you might, if you've got a strange engine that's got a strange pattern in it, you may have to have it. You may have to scope the pattern and get them to make it for you. There's not a heap of stuff that isn't covered on it. A lot of the stuff, modern stuff, is just generic sort of Bosch 36 minors or 60 minors too, that sort of thing. That's all in there. It's just listed as a generic. So a lot of stuff's covered. It's just some Japanese stuff is odd, like some of the Nissan stuff is, they went to some crazy patterns, so most of it's in there. Most people don't have to worry about that at all. It'll just scroll through and pick, and off you go. Of course you have to do your offset angle. This has a distributor. the distributor can be rotated. That's not how I would do it. I've just set it up in the middle. The offset angle can be adjusted, so you don't need to touch anything mechanically. Generally, it's pretty right. Again, don't try and start the engine just because you've got the trigger pattern selected. That's not how it works. We'll continue on. In the fuel section, there's your tuning method. Volumetric efficiency is selected. There's mass airflow. Some people use MAF sensors maybe on an NA car, or injection time, which is old school. Volumetric efficiency is normally how it would be done. Fuel type, this is definitely optional. So we've got ethanol, a blend, flex fuel, which is what we have, methanol, or just normal petrol. I think we'll choose flex fuel. It's showing an error because we haven't actually put flex fuel sensor into function department, but we'll fix that in a second. Most of this stuff you don't need to change. Base fuel pressure is something that needs to be put in there, 43 psi. That's pretty much what it's set at, so we'll leave that. One thing you should do here is disable the injectors. You don't want the thing squirting fuel in willy-nilly while you're trying to set the trigger and get the timing right. So disable injectors, click that. Most of the other stuff will be pretty fine. You just got to make sure it's got 6 injectors, sequential. Go to ignition.
Lots of stuff, eh?
Man, if you can play Fortnite, you can bloody configure a computer if you use your brain. I can't play Fortnite, but I can configure a computer, so anyone can do it. Anywho, ignition mode. This is important. It is set to direct fire, which is the most common sort of thing these days. Obviously, this is not that. It is a distributor. So we've got direct fire, wasted spark, which is twin posts. So you pair the firing stroke and the exhaust stroke on the opposite cylinder. That's handy if you haven't got enough outputs to run the engine in direct fire mode. Distributor is what we've got. Twin distributor, that is, I wouldn't say it's common, but it is a thing. 1UZs have twin distributors. Some old Porsche engines and stuff also do. That just fires off two coils, one after the other. And there's single wire CDI, which is a Haltech thing that uses a communication method through one wire to a CDI box, and then the CDI box controls the distribution of spark. So we're going to go distributor because that's what we've got. We're going to lock the timing because we need to crank the engine and set the timing with the trigger mode. So once we've done all that, we'll then go apply. But I can't do it because I need to change something. Hang on a second. So if we've got something in error like this, which is indicated by up here, we've got like a I'm waiting for you to set something yellow tag, and here we've got this is where you need to fix it red tag. It's because we don't have a flex fuel composition sensor set up yet that it won't let me select flex fuel, so I've just got to go in and do that. So down here we just write in flex and it comes up all the things that could be flex. So that's the one. You double click that, it comes up in the function box here. Now we've just got to assign it. So it's not assigned, we need to edit connection, and then we choose which wire. So in my notes here, flex is on DPI2. So we just double click on that. And there it is. Most of it will just be done for you. I wouldn't touch any of that if you're just setting it up.
Maybe that's something to note too. If you don't know what you're doing, don't touch it.
Pretty much. So just to clarify, I don't tune cars. I'm not a tuner. That's a different trade. What I do is configure, start, make sure the engine's working properly, make sure everything's reading properly, and that's the end of my job as the guy that wired the car. Then that gives you the opportunity to make sure nothing's leaking, everything's working. Because if you tow this into a dyno shop, who knows what could happen. If they go to do all this stuff and go to start it and the starter motor doesn't work or blah, 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 like just a million things that could go wrong, you're paying them to fix it.
Empty tank of fuel.
They're cranky because they generally aren't the happiest people on earth because they have to deal with stuff like that. So that's why I do this, and it is a good idea. Either you or whoever you can find gets the engine running and make sure everything's fine with it. The tuning side of thing is different altogether. That's ones and zeros, making it run smooth, perfect, all parts of the rev range. That's the nitty gritty. This is just making sure that it actually works. So I should be able to apply now. I have to reboot after I apply. Because I'm using an Apple with Windows on it, the keystroke for reboot doesn't work. So I'm going to have to get Woody to go around and on off. Done. Now down to functions. Every sensor on the engine needs to be configured. We'll just start at the top, boost control. Yes, it certainly does have boost control. So we got to check that our output connection's correct. I have got boost control on DPO2. So we do have to edit the connection. Change it to DPO2. Most of the other stuff will be correct. It's just generic 33 Hertz. The rest of it's kind of more the tuning side of things. Probably worthwhile mentioning, your tuner should still go through all this. If he or she doesn't, they're not doing their job properly. They shouldn't assume that you've done it right or whoever's set it up's done it right. However, if you want to get your engine started and make sure everything's okay with the engine so you can take it to get tuned, you do have to do this yourself. So that's all good. We'll move on to coolant temperature. Again, you just got to check your connection. I think this is a set one, so you can't change it anyway, which is all right. So yeah, this is a set connection on some of the sort of entry level ECUs. They just assign a connection, and that's, you can't change it. On the higher level ones, you can use a different AVI for it. So all we got to do here is calibration. This is the important part. In this little folder here, there's all the calibrations that they've pre-done. You can actually just manually do it if you know what the calibration is, so what the ranges are. But if you just press temp, you got a list of everything here. I think we will go with VPV8 coolant temperature, just because I know that's the closest. Some of this stuff is actually just, it's not actually sensors, it's just functions, so we don't need to worry about them. Fuel pump works fine. Idle control is disabled, so we will enable that and assign it a connection, which is DPO3. So most of the stuff in that seems pretty good. It's on 300 Hertz, which is, I think these operate within a wide range, but we'll just leave it for the moment and see what happens. If you run a stepper motor, it will prompt you differently to this. We've chosen BAC 2-wire, and there's 3-wire. There's also ignition control over it, which I've never used, but it's there. And there's also stepper motor, which I prefer not to use if I can get away with it, because they're generally a pain in the butt. So that's how we're going to run it. Its active state is low. It has a power supply, and the ECU pulses the solenoid at a frequency to operate it. One bit of a trick with this is with O2 control. I've selected it, and we've selected wideband 1, but it's in error now because we also have to then set up the actual wideband device, which is below. So it's a little bit convoluted, but this just because of the way the signal's coming in via the CAN line rather than through an AVI. So you've got to sort of select multiple things to get it to work. So if we enable all the things, then it allows us to apply. Then I have to get Woody to reboot it. Got all the sensors configured, everything's working okay. Had a problem with the coolant temp and air temp sensor not reading correctly. They have the option of having a pull-up inside the ECU or not, and that's for if you are piggybacking that ECU onto another engine. The pull-up is in the original ECU, so I just had to select them and that's fine. Just a little trap for old players like me. I should know better. So probably one of the last things you need to do is set the injector size, which I'm going to call 650. What did we say they were? Ignition system dwell time. Got a LS1 coil. Got an LS1 coil on it. They love a bit of dwell. You can go pretty high on them. Probably bump it up to about 4 at 14 volts would do, 4 milliseconds. We've got everything set up, everything's working. I can hear the idle control buzzing away there. The throttle sweeps through perfectly, temperatures are right. Now what we've got to do is set the trigger angle. Super important. As I said, will not run if that's not right. So we need a timing light. We need to crank the engine and make sure that the trigger actually is receiving properly, because there will be no timing, there will be no pulsing of the coil if it doesn't receive the trigger. So we go into a diagnostics page for that, which shows a trigger synchronization state and level and whether there's any errors. So it's pretty straightforward. It'll tell you whether it's working or not. If it says there's no errors and it's synchronized, then you go ahead and put the timing light on and change the angle. So it can be synchronized, it can be synced and working properly, but it can be in the wrong place in the engine cycle still. So that's what we're doing with the timing light, is setting it at TDC 1 firing stroke. So we'll get the jump pack because the battery's not real good, and the timing light.
Good.
Now that we've got a good trigger pattern, we have to actually set the timing. So I'm just putting a white mark on it so I can see the mark on the timing case. Pretty sure we already marked the actual pulley, so let's have a go.
You good?
We've got a light, it's all good spark and everything. It is out though, so I think it's about 20 degrees after, so we can just adjust it on the software to change it. So the offset angle on this particular ECU is just 0 to 720 degrees, so it does a full cycle. So we're 20 degrees out, so we'll change it from 70 to 50. Apply and see what happens. So once we've got the timing correct, we can take the ignition lock off because it is on 0 degrees, which isn't ideal. So we just go into the menu there and it's got a few options. There's just off all the time, always on, and clear flood, which we'll put it on clear flood mode. And then apply so it goes off. What I normally do when I'm confident that the timing's okay, to double check it, is I just introduce my own fuel source rather than turning the injectors on. Turning the injectors on introduces a whole new world of shit to go wrong. So rather than try and figure out whether the ignition system's correct via introducing that whole new world of shit going wrong, I just spray a fuel source down the inlet manifold. If everything's right, it'll just fire and sound good. If it backfires or does anything stupid like that, then something's wrong and we'll go back and look again. But in the interest of not fouling plugs and causing ourselves a nightmare, this is the way I do it.
It's also easier just to remove the brake booster vacuum rather than taking throttle bodies off and stuff.
If the throttle didn't have a 90-degree bend on it, I would just take the hose off and spray it in, but as long as it enters the manifold, as each valve opens, it will draw in its own bit, so let's just give it a try. That sounded pretty good. Backfiring is what we're looking for. If it's booming out the exhaust or blowing out the intake, the timing is wrong, or you've got the leads crossed over or something. So if it kind of gives a little fire and works, that's what we're after. Now we can switch the injectors on and introduce the fuel supply to it.
Reboot. Should be good to go. Yeah, dog. One running RB30.
This is very good. This is what we want. Switch her off. Now we'll check some stuff, make sure there's no leaks, and I've got oil pressure on the dash and also on the ECU, and that's all fine. But just after that quick startup, then we'll go through and check stuff over again. That's running really well, so very happy.
Oh, excuse you.
Bottom hose.
Can I put a bottle on it? Smoky. They're rolling. Didn't you say something about not revving it to 11T when you first get it started?
I didn't.
Oh.
And this runs probably.
Gearbox works, eh? When's there a shed skid?
When it's tuned and when it's in Tom's shed.
Not here.
I haven't got much concrete left out the front. Looks like we're all good. Cooling system's bled up sweet. Power steering's working. We just have to top up the transmission, get that level right, and we're nearly done.
Nitty gritty.
Except for the brakes and the fuel tank and
Catch can.
stuff.
And tuning. But we're ready for Instagram photos, Alan.
This is way past ready for Instagram.
Yeah?
Could have just painted that valve cover and put it on Instagram. Hashtag red crinkle.
Hashtag 99% complete.
Emma. Good. Talking. I don't want to alarm you, but the taco even works.